In just a few minutes, a Russian armored push worth tens of millions of dollars was broken apart on open ground in eastern Ukraine. Cheap FPV drones that can cost only a few $100s helped do it, and that gap is rewriting modern warfare in real time. Russian forces surged forward with tanks and BMP-3 vehicles, aiming to seize back a settlement held by Ukrainian defenders. A Ukrainian Mavic reconnaissance drone stayed overhead, and it streamed the movement live so every turn and spacing error was visible. FPV teams struck early, and the first impacts did not always create instant fireballs because extra armor and anti-drone netting absorbed part of the blast. That detail matters, because each hit stripped protection layer by layer until a single clean strike flipped the fight. One tank detonated so violently that the turret was thrown clear, and crews began abandoning damaged vehicles as panic spread down the line. This was not one weapon doing one job, because drones, artillery, and anti-tank missiles worked as one direct kill chain with near-zero delay. The biggest danger now is not losing vehicles. It is losing movement itself in a battlefield that can be watched every hour of the day. So why did cage armor, supporting fire, and even Western armored support still fail to hold the formation together? The answer sits inside the sequence that follows, where the low sky decides who advances and who collapses. This battle opened when a mechanized assault can be decided before the first explosion, and the side that sees the movement first can shape every second that follows. Russian tanks and armored vehicles rolled toward a settlement near the Ukrainian defensive line, and the push was timed to hit fast while light was still low. The column moved with a clear intent to shorten the dangerous crossing, so engines stayed high and infantry remained mounted while crews tried to keep momentum. Some vehicles carried extra plating and improvised anti-drone cages, and that detail signaled that the crews warned each other about what was waiting above the route. The approach was not a parade, because spacing and direction kept changing as drivers looked for firmer ground and tried to avoid obvious choke points near houses and tree lines. Yet the key problem was already in the sky, because a Ukrainian Mavic reconnaissance drone was tracking the formation from the first moments of movement. From that altitude, every turn left a clear pattern, and every pause created a fixed point that could be marked and shared. The feed did not stay inside a single operator's screen, because the video and coordinates were passed to a forward command post that could alert multiple teams at once. That is the first major shift, since detection now spreads across a network rather than staying inside one unit's limited view. Within moments, the command picture turned into a live map of speed, spacing, and likely routes, and it removed the fog that attackers once depended on. This matters even more in the current context, because Russian forces have been facing steady equipment losses, and they often try smaller mobile groups to reduce exposure. A smaller group can be harder to spot and cheaper to risk, but it also carries less mass to force a breakthrough, so mechanized power still gets used when ground must be taken and held. That pressure to seize space is why heavy vehicles still move forward, even when crews know that a watched road can turn into a trap. The Mavic's role here is not dramatic in a loud way, but it is decisive, because it gives the defenders time to prepare instead of time to react. FPV crews can be placed on alert, anti-tank teams can be told where armor is heading, and artillery can be warned that targets are forming before they reach cover. Even the simple act of watching changes driver behavior, since vehicles that think they are unseen tend to commit fully, while vehicles that feel observed begin to hesitate and drift. The attacker's hope is that speed will beat the system, but the defender's advantage is that the system is already running and it only needs confirmation. Modern drones can also stay on station long enough to hold contact, and a platform that can loiter around 40 to 50 minutes can follow a force through multiple decisions without losing the thread. That endurance turns an early sighting into continuous pressure, because the column cannot simply wait out the observer and then restart unseen. By the time the vehicles close on the settlement, the assault is no longer a surprise event, and it is a tracked sequence that is ready to be met at the next step. The battle continued when the mechanized push was worn down in seconds, because FPV attack drones can hit one vehicle after another without giving a column time to recover. The first launches came as soon as the lead tanks reached open ground inside the strike zone, and operators drove the drones straight into the front vehicles to force an early loss of rhythm. A second impact slammed into the middle armor, then more drones followed almost immediately, and the convoy kept moving as if momentum could outrun the threat. Another tank was struck next, and the blast looked heavy, yet the vehicle still rolled forward with its added shielding, taking the worst of the shock. Drivers saw the hits landing around them, but stopping in the open would turn a vehicle into a fixed target, so the instinct was to keep pushing and hope the next drone picked someone else. When the lead element is hit, the rest must slow or split, and that choice breaks the clean spacing that armor needs to move as a single fist. The early impacts did not always create a full fireball, because many vehicles carried extra plates, cage frames, and anti-drone netting that absorbed part of the blast. Some tanks stayed mobile after being struck, yet each hit tore away another piece of the outer layer and opened new angles for the next drone. Instead of a single kill, the damage built step by step, and the assault was forced to advance while its protection was being peeled back. One tank in this sequence became a harsh example of endurance, because it endured roughly 6 to 7 drone strikes before it finally detonated and stopped for good. Operators adjusted their approach on each run, and they aimed at exposed points around the rear, the track area, and the sections where added armor did not fully cover the frame. The vehicle kept functioning longer than expected, but that delay also turned it into a moving marker that pulled more drones toward the same spot. As the pressure rose, some drivers tried a simple survival move, which was to circle in the field to confuse the incoming drone's line of attack. A tight loop reduces forward speed and makes the path predictable, so the drone pilot can cut inside the turn and meet the vehicle where it must exit. That circling also compresses spacing behind it, and a brief traffic knot forms where several machines are forced into the same area under watch. The most striking detail is how little breathing room existed between impacts, because the gap from one detonation to the next could fall under 10 seconds. With no pause to check damage or reset direction, crews stay locked in motion, and that turns quick decisions into rushed guesses. Vehicles begin to drift, hesitate, and move without mutual cover, while drones keep arriving as if on a timer. As more strikes landed, the push stopped looking like a coordinated thrust and started looking like isolated vehicles trying to survive their own route. Some machines pressed forward with damaged fittings, while others broke line to avoid the last blast site, and those diverging choices made the formation unstable. By the end of this sequence, the key outcome was already clear, since the column had lost tempo, lost spacing, and lost the calm needed to bring follow on vehicles in cleanly. This is the moment when the assault stops being an attack and starts becoming a rescue attempt, because one violent detonation breaks the column's confidence and its control at the same time. An FPV drone reaches the critical angle and strikes where stored rounds sit. Then, the tank erupts, and the turret is thrown clear in a blast that signals an internal ammunition cook-off. The shock is not only visual, because the vehicles behind it must choose between driving into fire and debris, or slowing down in the open where drones are already circling. That choice creates a hard split, since some drivers push through smoke while others brake and swing wide, and the formation that was meant to hit as one mass turns into scattered machines. Radio traffic spikes in the same seconds, yet warnings arrive too late because the picture on the ground changes faster than orders can travel from one crew to the next. The last vehicle in the line is hit soon after, and it lurches forward with damaged parts, while its crew struggles to keep it moving as a shield for those behind. When it finally stalls, the hatch is left open in the rush to escape, and the crew abandons the vehicle and runs toward any cover that looks solid. That open hatches become an invitation, because FPV drones slip inside and detonates in the confined space, which turns the damaged hulls into a closed box of fire and fragments. The loss of the rear vehicle matters beyond its metal, because it blocks the route, and it signals to every crew that survival now depends on leaving the armor rather than staying with it. Once crews dismount, the fight changes scale, since soldiers on foot move slower and they have fewer options in open ground that offers almost no protection. Drones stay overhead and track the running groups, and each change of direction is spotted and relayed so supporting weapons can be aimed without delay. Artillery begins to land closer with each correction, and the impacts herd the survivors away from safe paths and toward dead ground where movement is easy to predict. Some soldiers try to hide behind burned vehicles, but those wrecks act like traps because they draw attention and they limit escape when another drone dives low. At the same time, the drone network is not only hunting, because it is also feeding coordinates to javelin teams that are waiting for heavy targets to show a clean silhouette. When a surviving armored vehicle tries to push forward to restore order, a missile strike from concealment hits the upper section and disables it before it can support the infantry. That single hit does more than remove hardware, because it confirms that any attempt to regroup will be met by layered fire that is guided from above. With vehicles damaged, crews scattered, and foot soldiers pinned by near misses, the assault loses its direction and turns into a series of private escapes. What follows is a steady collapse, because the column no longer has a clear lead element, and it no longer has the calm needed to coordinate smoke, suppressive fire, and recovery. Within minutes, the first mechanized push is stopped cold, and the remaining vehicles are either left behind or forced to withdraw in disorder while drones continue to watch every meter. Russia commits BMP-3 armored vehicles to patch the gap left by the broken column, and the goal is to force a short breakthrough with thick armor and a 100mm gun that can punish infantry positions. The vehicles push forward toward mined ground and scattered houses, and crews try to keep speed so the approach does not turn into a slow crawl under drones. A Ukrainian Mavic remains overhead and holds a steady view. Then it relays the track and timing of each BMP-3 to the teams waiting behind cover. When the first BMP-3 clears into open space, a javelin team receives the cue and launches, and the missile strikes the upper section where protection is thinner. The vehicle is crippled and smoke spreads fast. Then the crew scrambles out as flames begin to grow around the turret area. The camera view closes in and shows the cost of seconds, because the blast is so large that the hull ignites instantly, and there is no sign that any soldiers inside managed to escape in time. Russian command still tries to keep pressure on the line, so another BMP-3 moves forward even as the first one burns, and artillery fire starts to land nearby to suppress Ukrainian positions. A shell impacts close enough to shake the vehicle and throw dirt across its path, and that shock forces the driver to slow at the worst possible time. That brief slowdown turns a moving target into a predictable one, and an FPV drone closes in with a direct line that is hard to break. The hit lands cleanly and the vehicle detonates, because stored rounds inside the compartment ignite and create a chain reaction that feeds on its own heat. The blast is large enough to be seen from far away, and the shockwave knocks nearby soldiers off their feet as burning fragments scatter across the ground. In footage described, the explosion reads like a warning flare, since it shows that a single drone strike can trigger an internal disaster when ammunition is packed tightly. At that point, the reinforcement attempt stops looking like a rescue of the assault, and it starts looking like fresh targets being handed to the same system. Ukraine then shifts attention to the rear elements, because a retreating gun is still dangerous and it can support the next push if it escapes. A Russian self-propelled artillery vehicle completes a bombardment and begins to withdraw, but a long-range FPV drone is already tracking it as it moves away. A reconnaissance drone keeps visual contact and updates the line, and that steady eye prevents the target from vanishing behind smoke or terrain folds. The first strike damages the vehicle and slows it, Then the crew tries to escape while the platform struggles to move under its own power. A second FPV arrives soon after and impacts with precision, and fire erupts inside determinedly enough that the crew cannot regain control. When flames reach the engine area, the vehicle can no longer travel far, and the attempt to pull back turns into a stalled burn that ends the mission on the spot. Elsewhere, another weapon system moving under pressure is struck while in motion, and the footage describes a vehicle similar to an BUKM-2 being hit during withdrawal. By the end of this segment, every replacement that enters the lane becomes part of the same sequence, and the battlefield makes it clear that reinforcing a broken thrust without breaking the drone eye is simply adding more losses. This final phase shows the stalled assault ending without a turn of table, as Ukrainian infantry can erase a strong point while drones keep every exit under watch. After the armored thrust burns out, Russian assault troops fall back into houses and ruined blocks, and they try to turn the neighborhood into a shield. A Ukrainian Humvee packed with explosives moves toward a 5-story building that is being used as a holding point, and it drives in fast to reduce the time exposed. The vehicle stops at the entrance, then a demolition team dismounts and carries charges inside while observers watch the windows for muzzle flashes. Seconds decide survival here, so the team moves straight to the basement and places explosives where the structure will fail. Then, it retreats at speed before the Russian can react. The Humvee pulls back, warnings race through the Russian side, and the blast follows with a deep shock that drops a large section of the building into itself. Dust rolls outward and the upper floors sag, and the position that had offered cover becomes a broken trap that can no longer hold a line. This is not only a strike on one address, because it forces the remaining troops to move, and movement is exactly what drones punish. As survivors scatter, reconnaissance drones stay overhead and keep visual contact, and that feed turns every sprint into a marked event. FPV teams begin to chase the retreat, and they dive low through streets and yards, pushing soldiers away from cover and into open angles. Some fighters try to hide behind burned buses and damaged vehicles, but those shapes draw attention and leave no clean route when another drone comes in. Artillery crews receive updated coordinates and walk impacts closer, and each adjustment cuts off another path and breaks small groups apart. Heavy armor that tries to support the withdrawal faces the same problem because anti-tank teams remain ready and they can engage when a vehicle pauses or shows its roofline. A javelin strike then finishes a priority target, and the message is clear that a rescue vehicle can turn into a loss if it arrives late and blind. With exits blocked and support fading, Russian coordination collapses into individual moves, and the area becomes a series of small escapes instead of a planned fallback. Ukrainian infantry does not rush forward in a wave because rushing into unknown rooms under drones can waste lives. Instead, squads advance in short bounds. They secure one position, they pause, scan, and move again when the overhead picture confirms the next step. Drones point out movement, mark corners, and warn about hidden threats, and that guidance keeps the clearing work tight and controlled. Trenches are reclaimed, buildings are checked, and observation points are re-established. Then the line stabilizes and begins to shift back. Supply routes that had been under pressure reopen, and defensive posts are rebuilt with better spacing and better awareness than before. The closing image is simple and hard to ignore, because an FPV drone circles above the rubble like a patrol, and it signals that the low sky is now a front line that never sleeps. In this kind of fight, the price tag matters less than the link between eyes and fire, and that link moves so fast that minutes become losses that cannot be repaired during the assault. This battle was not just a failed Russian armored thrust, because it delivered a blunt warning to every army still trusting old rules. A mechanized column tried to force ground near a defended settlement, yet a single Mavic overhead turned movement into a live target list, and FPV teams began stripping armor piece by piece until the formation broke. Once a turret blew off and crews started abandoning vehicles, the fight shifted from breakthrough to survival, and drones helped guide artillery and javelin strikes onto anything heavy that tried to restore order. When BMP-3 reinforcements entered the lane, they were pulled into the same loop, and one clean hit triggered a chain detonation that ended the rescue attempt. The big lesson is simple and unsettling, because cheap drones can now coordinate artillery, missiles, and assault teams as one direct kill chain, so power is moving away from sheer tank counts and toward speed of detection and decision. The next question is where this goes. Will Russia build stronger electronic warfare and tougher short-range protection to break the drone link? Or will Ukraine keep scaling drone density until armored movement becomes a gamble almost every time? There is no fixed answer yet, and that is why this moment matters. Drop a comment with a clear take on what comes next. If this kind of frontline breakdown helps, like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to Military Force for more analysis every week.